if you can sort of just interrupt at any time, I'd be really grateful, because otherwise this is going to be a really boring Gary-centered talk. Okay, starting out in research, Zandy asked me to talk about three things. Starting out in research, focusing your effort and maintaining your motivation to complete the PhD, and then what do you do after you get your PhD? How can you advance your career and move forward? So I'll try and cover each of those areas if I can. And, some just general comments about starting out in research. The first one, what do you want to do after you complete your PhD? I think that's a really, really important question to ask yourself. Where are you heading? Because that will sort of help influence, or it should influence, the sort of study that you do. If you want to work as an academic, and for sure, you've got to be strong in all sorts of research methodologies, because you'll be supervising students across all sorts of areas. Are you ready? Do you understand research methodologies? Undertake extra subjects in first year? Well, I actually had to study abroad as well. And I'm convinced that the time and effort to do that really, really enhanced my skills as an educational researcher. My main area was in educational psychology at the time. Find a good supervisor who works in your area of interest. I started a PhD and it went nowhere because the supervisor had no idea what I was talking about. I then went to the University of Western Australia. I went from Sydney to Western Australia to study with Rupert Thackeray, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So I moved to the other side of the country to work with someone who I thought was a world expert. He'd worked with Arnold Bentley, who was a famous music psychologist in Reading University in the 1950s and 60s, did pioneering research in our area. But unfortunately, he had a brain tumour, so I then had to move back to Sydney and go to do my PhD at Sydney University. But finding a good supervisor is really, really important, even if you have to travel or do it from a distance. And then I say here, expect a supervisor to guide and probe you, not come up with all the good ideas. I always think that, you've got to be so proactive that you've got to be stretching the supervisor and the supervisor stretching you. And my best PhD students have done exactly that. They've sort of, I know quite a lot about the area, but they come up with all these new ideas or these things that they've read, and that sort of, gets me thinking. So it's a two-way dialogue, a real balance between what they give to me as the supervisor and what I give to them as the student. But don't wait for the supervisor just to sort of tell you what to do. You're not ready for a PhD if that's how it works. When I talk to my previous PhD students, one of the things that they always mentioned to me is they learnt to write by taking note of my editing of their work and their comments that I'd plaster on their written material that they sent me. So I think that's really important. And I can think of a couple of students who I'd tell them 5 or 6 times the same thing not to do, and it would keep reappearing, and the next time I got some work from them. I can think of some other students who, sort of, they're all now professors in universities but the first time I mentioned something, I didn't need really to mention it again, because they not only implemented my changes and my editing and the rewordings, whatever, but they thought about why I was doing it that way, and they thought about my comments. So I think that's really, really important, that you sort of take note of your supervisor's editing of your own work. And then that last thing, which is really a summary of what I've already said, you need to become autonomy independent rather than autonomy dependent. I mean, you're choosing to do this PhD, you're choosing to do this particular topic, you're interested and passionate about it, but you have to be independent too, rather than autonomy dependent, where you're waiting for the supervisor to tell you what to do and how it should be done, feeding all the ideas. Okay, so let me see if I can get to the next slide. I was fiddling with Google, as we all do, and just seeing what universities say about common qualities of good PhD students. And you get all these silly things that they put on the websites. We've got them on our website. This is from the University of Queensland, and it looks all fine, doesn't it? Time management, attention to detail, you're resilient, you love learning, curious. I mean, but you can almost say that about anything. They're sort of like motherhood statements. And so for me, none of that resonated. So I tried to think about, for me, what are the most important qualities? And the first one is being curious, that you're never, ever satisfied with a particular explanation. You always want to understand it more or add to it, and, with a rainbow of ideas, bring it all together. So curiosity is obviously incredibly important. Perseverance is incredibly important. I mean, most people drop out of PhDs because they're not in it for the long haul. They find it really difficult to sustain the effort. So you need to, persevere. You need to be resilient too, because there's going to be some knockbacks. I'll never forget the first time I sort of thought I had a fantastic chapter. I showed it to my supervisor who'd been working on it, and I thought it was the best thing ever written as a literature review. And he pulled it all apart, and he got me to restructure the whole thing. And that really brought me back down to earth, which is good. That's exactly what I needed. Everyone talks about you need to be passionate about the topic. You need to have a real fire in your belly that you want to do this. But there's a danger there. And the danger about being passionate about something is that you don't become objective. You want to prove your point. You think it should be like this, so I'm just going to get data that sort of says this and prove my point, and et cetera, et cetera. So passion is fine, but first and foremost, you have to be incredibly objective. You have to be able to stand back from your own views and the views that are out there, and make sure that whatever study that you design is really, really carefully crafted in a way that will get good data that will really tell us whether that's the truth or not. So objectivity for me is by far the most important quality of all the things I could say about the qualities that you would bring as a person to your PhD studies. Now, just really quickly, when I started, everyone was talking about Kay Anders Ericsson and John Sloboda and a few other studies at the time. And one in particular, the role of deliberate practice in the acquisition of expert performance. You're getting all these airport books by Malcolm Gladwell and etc., who was sort of saying that, it takes 10 years to be an expert and you've got to do 10,000 hours of practice. There's evidence everywhere talking about that. And, a beautifully eloquent explanation by Kay Anders Ericsson. I mean, this is one of the most cited articles in our whole area. You could actually go to the Google Scholar and check the number of citations on one day, and I bet by 24 hours later, there's a couple more citations to that particular article of 1993, that psychology review article that he wrote, and essentially just telling us that it takes about 10 years, 10,000 hours of practice to become an expert. And that study was done with violinists and pianists at the Warsaw Academy. But I remember when I read that, it didn't really resonate with what I'd found as a high school music teacher. I was finding some kids were, really progressing really quickly and well by doing very little practice, and other kids seemed to be putting in the effort, but not, it really wasn't, helping them. So I was really interested from the other side, from the bottom looking up rather than from the top looking down, as Ericsson done with his retrospective studies of asking people to remember when they were 5 and 6 how much practice they were doing. I was actually interested in young learners when they first start. What are they thinking doing? And I remember that year of education psychology that I did at Ray Debus at Sydney University. It absolutely changed my life. We used to read 5 or 10 articles a week at minimum, and we'd have to spend the first hour, an hour and a half talking about them. And we were expected to have read them and know them. We had very, very long essays that we had to write. And Ray Debus kept introducing me to really, really fascinating stuff. And I remember one of the chapters that I wrote was from Carol Ames, a motivation expert at the time. She was working at the University of Michigan. And she wrote this chapter called Effective Motivation, the Contribution of the Learning Environment. And in the first paragraph, she says, positive motivation is more than the demonstration of effortful activity or even time spent on task. It is more than 10,000 hours of practice. That's essentially what she was saying. It is reflected in how students think about themselves, the task, and their performance. And, those two sentences have virtually guided everything that I've done in terms of my skill development and musical development research over the past 25, 35 years since well, actually, while I was doing my PhD and subsequently. So, that really had a huge impact on me. And it's sort of, I still come back to that because I love that chapter and I love that quote. I think it's helped frame me, my research, but also distance me from this other area of thinking about this. Okay, so, I, I still don't feel comfortable with Erickson's explanation, even though I have nothing but respect for what he did and his particular perspective. And so I'm going to stop in a minute and ask if there's any questions. But I remember when I did my first article, this is one of the 5 articles I got from my PhD. I sent it into Psychology of Music in 1994, and it went through about 5 reviews. I thought I'd written the best article in the world, and I had to change it or revise it about 5 times. And David Hardgraves was the editor at the time, and he was just amazing. I learned so much from him. He was so kind, so generous, and so calm and patient with me, because he knew what the article needed to look like in order to get accepted, and he helped me immeasurably. So I've been incredibly, grateful to David. Rupert Thackeray was my first PhD student, supervisor rather, and unfortunately he passed away of a brain tumour, so I couldn't finish my PhD with him. And then I met Jane Davidson, a couple of years later, and she's transformed my life too, because it's the most amazing research you could ever imagine, and her contribution is, just astronomical. Okay, but the reason why I'm showing you this thing is because I had my middle initial in my name, Gary E. McPherson. And I remember one of the things my supervisor said to me, always use your middle initial on every publication, because there will be another Gary McPherson out there, and there is. And I remember just the first conference I went to, just sort of, joking about this in over dinner with some of these, people like David Hardgraves and other people. And David Hardgraves said the same thing. There's another David Hardgraves in England who was working on arts education, and he was often confused with, the music psychologist and music educator David Hardgraves. And then Cliff Madsen put his hand up, who's, written more publications than anyone. And he said, yeah, there's another Cliff Madsen out there. So I just say that, keep that in mind. I tell all my PhD students to do that. I'm not sure whether it's useful or not, but I always have my middle initial. And the other thing too is you'll see that how unaware people were overseas of Australia and what was happening. I was working at the University of New South Wales, not the University of South Wales in Wales, United Kingdom. And so they thought, that's where I was working, and University of South Wales, and I had that misprint there. So I've learnt, because I was so fed up with that article and I just wanted to see it in print, I've learnt that you proofread everything, absolutely everything, because the most obvious things will always appear wrong in print, and particularly with figures. Can't tell you the problems I've had with figures where you think they've got the perfect thing. It's a PDF, they can't change it, and for some reason it sort of turns out different in the publication. Okay, so a couple of other quick comments, and then I will stop for a moment. The topic that you choose, I really think it's important that you use or adopt an established and robust theoretical framework. Don't invent one. Everyone I know who's invented their own theory or come up with their own terms and stuff has had problems writing it up, and problems with examiners as well. The other thing that you don't do when you're starting off is invent new terms. Be really careful with the terminology. One of the great problems that we have in music psychology is musicians and psychologists use exactly the same term in different ways. You get this in educational psychology and psychology as well. The word talent, for example, is used in a completely different way in educational psychology as compared to psychology. So you've got to be really careful about that and know that as well. And so know how to use the terms within a particular theory. And then find a topic or an issue that adds to, but also fits neatly within a theory. So you're picking out a little piece of the jigsaw puzzle in this particular theory to sort of add some extra knowledge, but also choose something that's distinctive. You've got to be, passionate about it and interested in it, obviously, but try and come up with something that's distinctive. I remember the first time I gave my paper overseas, the results of my PhD, I had a couple of people come up to me and say, look, that's the first time anyone's spoken about this topic. We really enjoyed it. And I was talking about improvisation, for goodness sake. No one had studied improvisation in music psychology or music education in a quantitative manner that I had. So that's important. Think about how it's going to be read by people around you, and particularly other academics. Is it going to be seen as distinctive? Because that'll give you the name, or give you a good name. The other thing is be fastidious early, particularly when you're devising surveys and interview questions and data collection instruments. I can't tell you the number of times I would have gone through surveys over 2-3 months and revised them 40, 50 times, because every time I'm making like a 1%, improvement in it. And sometimes students sort of think, oh, the survey's ready to go out and I'll have a go at it. And then they say, yeah, okay, did all the changes, it's ready to go out. Well, it's not. You really have to live with it for weeks and weeks and, give it to other people and even students, or, do a pilot or whatever. But, be fastidious. And, that's so incredibly important. Anyone who's worked with me knows that I drive them crazy with, keep coming up with comments and stuff about how to improve it or make revisions, or have you thought about such and such. Data collection techniques obviously need to be robust, and as robust as possible. And then I say here, think about your subjects. Don't waste people's time. I can't tell you the number of times students want to do interviews or they want to do a survey, and they come up with this stuff, and you think, God, they're going to sort of be with this person for an hour and a half. And so, why not break it off, get them, to do all the background information you can find out from elsewhere, or you can get them to do it in an email back to you, cut that out, and then, get to it. Or duplication in data collection instruments. So, don't waste your subject's time. Be really careful. Get in there, get out, and only deal with the things that you need to do. Obviously, build a relationship with them, be friendly, all that sort of stuff. But apart from that, just get quality data as quickly as you can, because people, they're not necessarily interested in your study like you are, and they'll start to turn off in terms of their motivation after 10 or 15 minutes maximum, particularly with kids. Okay, I promise I'm going to stop after this. This is going to be like a strobe. I'm going to go through it really quickly. What are the theories that have been really important to me? The first one is Barry Zimmerman's self-regulated learning. Now, Barry hasn't published, in fact, he passed away a couple of days ago. He hasn't published for about 15 years because he had Parkinson's, but he's got 166,000 citations. And just this year, in the last couple of months, he's got another 10,000. That was last year. I'm sorry. 2024, he's got 10,000 citations, which is phenomenal for someone who hasn't even published for over a decade. But he invented self-regulated learning, which is there. I understood that theory very, very early on in the 1980s. I was reading about it, and then I was reading articles by Barry where he was talking about when kids learn anything, they go, you can look at these scientific questions and psychological dimensions like motive, what directs them to want to do it. When they do it, what method do they apply? How much time do they use doing it? What's their behavior? What's the physical environment and social? And that's my PhD and my first ARC grant. Looking at that diagram gave me some great ideas for my first ARC grant that I got with Jane Davidson. And that's what we did with kids. For 5 years, we studied those 6 dimensions. The other one is self-determination theory, and I'm on about this all the time with Edward Deasy and Richard Ryan. It's been around since the 1980s, but an incredible theory. It's so well developed right now, and you've got these different levels of motivation, from being completely disinterested in something, and on the other end of the spectrum, being really, really interested, intrinsically motivated, and these levels in between. So using that theory, you can sort of start to think of, okay, what does a motivation look like? What does external regulation look like? What is introjected? What is identified, integrated, and then intrinsic? So you can sort of start to move through all of that, or even the psychological needs, our deeply felt psychological needs. And all of those explain intrinsic motivation. The thing I'm working on right now is self-determination theory and the sort of styles of teaching or parenting, like authoritative parenting or teaching as compared to authoritarian. And I worked with Eliza Cooper. She came out from the Netherlands to work with me for 6 months, and we devised this way of doing that, where we looked at everything that was happening in lessons with a teacher, and we came up with really, really clean results. It was just so obvious that high autonomy support triggered engagement and low autonomy support triggers resistance. And so we could come up with all these findings that made a lot of sense. The other one I use is, John Hattie's visible learning theory: feedback, feed forward, feed up. Feedback as a comment or criticism of what the person has done. Feed forward is looking at strategies to improve the situation, and feed up as goal setting, etc. So one of the studies I've just published in the last month or two is a study with teachers at a prominent music school in the United States. 83% of their feedback was feedback, and 85% of what they were doing was feedback on the task. Does that make sense? I mean, if you've got a really strong theory, you're much better positioned to get clean results that are going to be meaningful results. So at this point, any particular comments or questions? I get on a roll, don't I? I can't stop talking. Anyone got a comment?
Feel free to use the chat if you prefer. Or
Yeah, okay, sorry, I didn't see that.
Well, I have a question going back to the publication process, and
Yep.
You're talking about your first article. So I was wondering if you have any suggestions for our current PhD students who might be facing those rejections and how to handle those. Any strategies for that process?
It's good that you're getting rejected, because if publishing's too easy, then you'll never really refine your craft even further. I remember my first article in the Journal of Research in Music Education was path analysis. Now, at that stage, no one had done structural equation modeling or path analysis. It had never appeared in the journal before. So the reviewers had real problems reviewing my article, and it took like 18 months to get through. But it's still, my proudest moment of getting that published, even though it's got hardly any citations because people don't know how to read it. I should have probably put it in psychology of music. Psychology of music, I said, I went through like 5 revisions. That's normal. Just get used to it. You're not going to get it published the first time. My first 2 publications were completely different publications when they appeared in print as compared to what I submitted. Now, I think these days people have got a lot more help in terms of supervisors and, preparation, etc. I was doing it as a lone ranger when I was, back in the 90s, and that first 10 years of my publications, I wasn't sharing it with anyone, and then sending it in and getting the reviews back. So I think these days, you students aren't, you do share it with other people, get other people to read it and give comments. So, before you hand it in, it's probably in better shape. So, rejection is part of being a great researcher. Someone was telling me that I think it was, I better not mention the name, but one of the most cited researchers in psychology ever had like 20, 30 articles rejected by journals. Now, you think these are stars, they can't possibly do that, but they get rejections. We've all had rejections. It's part of being a researcher. But if it was rejected, you remodel it, put it somewhere else, because it may not have been the right place to put it in the first place.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other comments? Anything? Yeah.
I have a question, maybe slightly from the other side, but I think it's also very relevant. How can you tell in like PhD interviews, for example, who has this intrinsic motivation, who is going to be able to do this, because, you know, everyone is pretty good at presenting well, but then actually when it comes to the 3 years, like how can you see that, or how do you develop it in somebody if it needs to be?
Yeah, well, look, I'd say two things. Firstly, you can't
Okay.
tell, because some of the people I thought, oh, you know, this is going to be a struggle, I'm going to have to write it for them, have turned out to be really, really good. And just the opposite. Some of the people I thought were going to be fantastic have, you know, been hard work or created a lot of work for me. But I think on the other hand, you know, to balance that, you know, sort of, it's like, you know, when I'm watching interviews for a new position and stuff, you can sort of tell whether the person really knows the field or really knows about that theory. Most people, when they're presenting about their PhD, they've got a topic. They might have the theory that they're still sort of learning about, and they know what they want to do, but then they don't know how to analyze the data. But they don't know what they're going to do. They really don't know what they're going to do when they get the data and analyze it. They think that that comes next, when it comes at the front end. You've got to be thinking, if you're going to do a survey or research questions or interviews or whatever, you've got to know what you're going to do with that data when you get it. Remember, I said don't waste people's time and don't waste the subject's time. You know, collect data that's going to prove your point, or you can do a statistical analysis on, or you can do a, you know, a qualitative analysis of in some form. Think about how you're going to analyze the data, and you know, make sure you get quality data on those aspects rather than this smorgasbord of stuff that most of which you don't use. We've all collected data that we don't use. I could write another 50 articles easy with data that I've collected that never used. But I'm too old and cynical now to try and want to do that.
Thank you.
We have a question from Stephanie in the chat. Stephanie said, thanks, Gary, for your insights. Do you have any advice for those of us on the other side of passing our PhDs, ECR advice?
Yeah, now, could you mind if I just go back to my slides, because I'm going to get to that. I say here, constantly question the quality of the data that you're collecting. Never, ever be satisfied with the stuff that's coming in. Always trying to make it better. I tell all my PhD students to read the New York Times, because if you want really clear writing and see people who know what they're doing and presenting ideas and succinctly and clearly, the New York Times is the best place to start. You know, they lead from the top. Every paragraph has got one idea and it's beautifully, beautifully written. Keep focused. Resist anything that's not directly related to your research questions. It's too easy to get distracted when you're doing it. Write every day of the week. I must admit, you know, I got through my PhD so quickly because I set goals. I can remember, even if I had a family day, when I got home, I would write one sentence or one paragraph. Okay, so write. Even if you throw it away the next morning, make sure you write. I can remember sort of driving home, being stuck in traffic and thinking, I'm exhausted and sort of just want to sit down and watch television, but I've got to get that paragraph done. I've just got to get that paragraph done. And so you have to be really fussy in that way too. So here's the, you know, hopefully what you were talking about. If you worked in the United States, then you would not be able to work at the university where you studied. So when I was at the University of Illinois, for example, they just wouldn't employ you. You had to be out for 10 years before they would employ you at the university. And I sort of sometimes think that one of the faults or problems that we have in Australia is that students will go through a university, undergraduate, master's, PhD, then they'll expect to get a job there. And the way I think about that is that that's not going to be good for you. It's not going to be good for the university either. Why? Because they've already got what you have to offer at that university. They've given it to you, you've got it, etc. So look, I've worked in 5 different countries. I've taught in Hong Kong and China and Sweden and the United States, and I've taught in Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, Tassie, and WA. That's overboard. You don't need to do that. but you need to sort of think about, okay, well, I may need to move around a bit. So that's my hard-nosed view about it. Because, when you get a job in a university, you've got to be distinctive and offer something different to what they've already got. They don't want clones of themselves. So that's the first thing. I mean, it's great if you can get a postdoc, but don't expect the postdoc to, run into a full-time position. That's the reality, I think. Publish a dissertation. Look, I'm, everyone says publish while you're doing your PhD, and yeah, that's okay if you're doing a thesis by publication. But if you're doing a more traditional thesis, I'm not sure that that's good, to be honest. I think, the best quality articles come at the end when you can sort of really devote yourself to that rather than writing up a PhD. But that's just my own personal view for a traditional dissertation as compared to one by publications, which is very, very different. It's a different template. Work on your CV. I got professional help with my CV. I went to 2 or 3 people who could help me sort of put it in a form that looked good, that it was, got all the key points out, the right sort of font, formatting, etc., etc. I paid a couple of $1,000s to help me to get my CV sort of formatted, 20 years ago, and that's why I got positions. I think it's part of the reason I got positions overseas. Why would you want to give an endowed chair to someone from Australia at a prominent American university? That doesn't happen. So you've got to be really distinctive. You've got to stand out from the crowd. I talk to students when they're applying for a job, and I say, what's the first sentence of your job application? What do you put on the first sentence of your cover letter? And they say, oh, dear search committee, I want to apply for position such and such. And I say, well, okay, if I was chairing the committee, you'd be over in that basket, and I'd be interested in people on this basket, because you're not standing out. From the first sentence, you've got to be different. So you've got to find a way in that first sentence of drawing them in and showing that you've got something distinctive and different. And there's techniques and ways you can do that. So yeah, I mean, what else? Understand your strengths and weaknesses. The best interviews I've ever done are people who would say to us, this is my PhD, this is what I've done, I want to work here, I can offer this, but I realise I've still got these things I need to learn. And for a junior position, when you hear someone say that, that can be really important, that they know their own strengths and weaknesses. They know that they've still got development to take place in these particular areas, and they're honest about it. The people who come in and, pretend that they know everything for a junior position just turned me off, to be honest, because even now I feel that I'm inadequate in many ways. So no one is the full, the finished product. So look, I don't know whether any of that sort of made any sense, but my hard-nosed view, they're the things that are really important for me. It's just important, and it makes a difference. So can I ask, who's applied for a job recently? Anyone? Come on, okay. So just someone tell me what your first sentence was. I've already told you what not to say, but what could you say? Scott, did you want to say something?
Just trying to find what I sent through as my first sentence. It was just for teaching. They want people to do point 2 and point 4 associate lecturing at the uni. So yeah, I think it was something along the lines you said. I tried to make it stand out a bit, rather than just be the boring old. I've done this and I'm good at this. All that sort of stands out anyway, because you have to give them all your background and what you've done before and where you've worked and what qualifications are. So they sort of know that.
But that's in the CV. That's not on the cover letter.
Yeah, they want to know something different in that cover letter where you're sort of standing out. So I can't remember exactly.
It's hard. I mean, there's that you that's the first thing I'd say to people is be really careful about that, think about it. I mean, I can remember when I applied for the job in Melbourne, I was very aware that because I'd read their plan for getting themselves out of $1 million worth of debt, and they wanted someone who could, they thought the performance teaching and that area was going to take off, and it was going to, people were going to pay full fees and all that sort of stuff. And that was my area. That's one of the reasons why I applied for it. So I knew that I was a good fit for them, and hopefully they thought that I was a good fit for them. So it was both ways. And I remember my first sentence was, "Dear Search Committee, I seek the challenge of," and sort of I was telling them what I personally wanted to do with my life, right? And in the interviews, I made sure that I was talking from their perspective as well as mine. So I can remember being asked a question from one of the areas that felt threatened, that it thought, you know, out of the sub-disciplines of music was going to be, you know, made redundant, and staff were going to be made redundant. And I you know, spoke to them and I showed them some slides. I was ready to sort of show that I valued their area. I did that with 2 areas, actually. I won't say what they were, but they felt very threatened. And I had fantastic slides with gorgeous visuals, and made some comments. And then I showed also that I knew about their history. I can remember, you know, some questions about jazz and improvisation with, you know, Brian, oh my goodness, I've forgotten the guy who started the course in the 1970s. It's just slipped my mind. But I said, you know, he had, you know, finding your own personal voice. So I talked about his philosophy, and having met him at a conference and talked to him about that. From that made them comfortable with me, right? And then, you know, I had a better chance of positioning myself for that position, because it was, you know, what do I bring to them, the other way around. Yeah. Sorry, Melissa?
Oh, Gary, they were great examples. Thank you. And that's what I was going to ask you in terms of distinctiveness. I mean, it feels like the field, and not just our field, which is kind of small, but just generally academia is very crowded. It's very competitive. Yep. People are achieving amazing things all over the place. To stand out, it's getting harder and harder.
Yep. Yeah.
Can you give us 1 or 2 examples of applications that you've read? I appreciate your examples, which are great. Like what are the things that have grabbed you when you've read someone's application?
Look, when I was director of the Conservatorium, I think I put on something like 78 staff. So all I was doing for those 10 years was sort of, you know, doing lots and lots of interviews and things. Yeah. And it was those people who were different, you know, they had good pedigree, right? They had the good degrees. They had a solid dissertation. If they were more in the academic line, I read you know, I at least skimmed through their dissertation. I wanted to know about it, because I wasn't going to put someone on who'd done a sloppy dissertation, because, you know, they'll reproduce that with their students when they get there. So that was all given. But when they came into the interview, they were excited about what they were doing. They're happy to be there. They it was like I could see, I had a sense that this was their life mission. This is what they were meant to do with their lives, and they knew it, and they wanted us to know it. You know, that they could map out their research over the next 20, 30 years, or their career, for example. They could tell you what hasn't been done, what needs to be done, what they're interested in, what they're not interested in, what they have expertise in and what they don't have expertise in, or what they're good at and what they're not good at. So it was just honesty. You know, the people who had most impact on me maybe not did the, you know, the most eloquent or brilliant, intellectually satisfying interviews, but they just seemed like genuine people. I wanted to work with them, right? And I wanted to mentor them, and, you know, so I felt good about it. But, you know, look, I'll tell you what, when I went to Illinois, you normally, for an interview, you go in for 3 or 4 days. You start the first morning, you meet the dean, you have breakfast, then you might give 2 or 3 classes, you go out for lunch, you go out for dinner with the other search committee, you do the same thing for 2 or 3 days. So you've taught about, you know, 6, 9 lessons. You've met with the doctoral students, other staff, you've met the dean, the director, the head of academic, you know, et cetera, et cetera. They know you, and they get most of their good information from having dinner and lunch with you. And when I came in, I was getting on the plane. I didn't even know to sit in Melbourne. I was getting on the plane and I didn't even know where my interview was, right? So I went in, I gave my presentation to the staff. They said I had 20 minutes. I told them at the start that I couldn't do it in 20 minutes. I needed at least 40 minutes to an hour to tell them what I felt and what I wanted to do, which they gave me. Then I went into a 1.5 hour interview with, because I was the Ormond chair, it was people right across the university. But that was it. Then I got on the plane and went home. And I still remember thinking, they don't know me. They've got my CV, they've heard what I said, all the motherhood statements I might have said during or the rehearsed statements I said in the interview. They don't know me. And so find a way for them to know you. Whether, that's sort of after you do your interview or whatever, someone's picking up at the airport or whatever it is. Look, can I have coffee with you? Do you mind if we have lunch together? Because I didn't have lunch or dinner with anyone at the University of Melbourne. And I vowed I would never, ever do that again. Because, how can they know me? I got the job, but sort of, then I agonized about whether I wanted to take it. So, it's find a way to draw them in so that they can get to know who you are personally as well as academically. And, maybe there's various ways you can do that. I don't have any set template, but try and find a way. Think about that before you get on the plane or you do your Zoom interview. Anything else? This is depressing, isn't it? And I don't mean to be depressing because academia is the most amazing job if you can get it. And it wasn't, look, people say it's harder now, and it is. Well, maybe it is, but it wasn't particularly easy for me either. I can remember my first job. I came in as a tutor, University of Western Australia. I was expected to get my PhD in 3 years, otherwise I was out. I was virtually studying full time, but I was teaching 21 hours a week. When I was a high school teacher, I was teaching 18 hours a week. So that was it. So it's hard. Somehow you've got to get yourself through it.
I'm going to ask another one, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Grants, similar kind of question, in terms of distinctiveness.
Yep.
Is it a different question of distinctiveness in that space? And how do you distinguish that from kind of building those relationships to get a job? What about in the grant space? How do we get people to give us money? How do we stand out from the crowd in that particular domain?
Yeah, and it's really, really hard. I mean, I got the first Jane and I got the first ARC grant in music education for a quantitative study. I mean, PhD was the first quantitative study done in the area too, but sort of, getting a job, it's a two-way process, sort of they want you, you want them sort of thing. Whereas for a grant, it's more the other way. You've got to fit in with what they want. Because it's completely blind and you don't know who the referees are, it's all that sort of stuff. So you've got to know what the areas are, and you've got to have a really, really innovative take on something. And it might even be a simple idea, a really simple idea, but it's an interesting take on that idea that fits into some sort of larger national scheme of, climate change or health or well-being or whatever these big areas are now. I don't know. I mean, I got an ARC with Paul Evans like 5 or 6 years, or about 7 years ago, actually. It was a 4-year grant. And I remember I was fastidious and relentless with Paul and I. We thought we had our application ready and like a week before, and we sent it off to the office to get comments and stuff. But then we just kept working at it 24 hours a day virtually. I can remember getting up at night and making just little tweaks because I'd thought of something else. So you think that's what you've got to do it. That's what you've got to do to get a grant. You've also got to have the team too. You've got to have really good people. If there's a weak link in the team, they'll see it. Right? Now, a weak link may not be you can have early career researchers in the team, but you've got to tell the grant people how you're going to use them. What real skills are they bringing? And some of that is just about finding ways to shape it and say it, and learning how to do that, and give your grant, give your publication, give your PhD to other people to read all the time. It took me 30 years to sort of stop being a lone ranger and work with people and collaborate. And as soon as I did that, things flourished. There's nothing worse than being a lone ranger in research. And they don't survive anymore. They used to survive, but like me, they're a dinosaur.
Mm.
Right. It was garbled. I don't know whether I said anything useful there.
No, that was great, Gary. Thank you. And I think in terms of being a lone ranger, that's why something like AMPS is just so valuable, because if you are in an isolated situation just by virtue of the context, it's so important to have these kinds of organisations.
Yeah. Look, grants are hard, but you've got to keep persevering. I remember our Vice Chancellor, Deputy Vice Chancellor Research saying that they did this study, and the people who get the most grants are the people who put in the most grants. They get the most knockbacks. They get 20% of the grants, but they're putting in, a hell of a lot more grants than other people. So they just more probabilities they get them. I can see another who pays for the lunch, especially considering ethics and courtesy. They should. If they've got you at the university, they normally pay your expenses like your accommodation and airfare or whatever, or they should. If they're not, then I'm not sure I want to work with them. But the other one was, I'm not at this stage yet, in a slightly tangential question about postdocs. Is it okay to do a postdoc at the same institution where you got the PhD, or do you go elsewhere? You take a postdoc. If you can get a postdoc, you grab it. It doesn't matter where you do it. Take the postdoc. But what I would say is, don't expect, okay, I've got a postdoc here at the University of Melbourne that I can now work here for the rest of my life. That's the wrong way of thinking about this, okay? Because you're closing, the walls in on yourself rather than thinking bigger. I'm not saying that, you can't have an incredible career by staying at the same institution. Lots of people do that. It's fantastic. But sort of, a lot of people, after the postdoc's gone, they're not going to put you on. So you've got to be open-minded about it, realistic about it too. I mentioned I went over to Illinois to have a semester study abroad. It cost me airfare and accommodation while I was over there, but it was fantastic. That I needed that to get the skills to do my PhD or the topic that I was doing. There's lots of opportunities with scholarships and study abroad, and even if it's like a 4-week trip over there to meet people, you try and position yourself to get some of that stuff so you can connect with people outside the university.
Just to add on to that question, it seems like the common pathway forward after the PhD is to find a postdoc. But my supervisors were.
It's not. I don't think it is. I mean, postdocs are so rare.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're just not around. I mean, the ones we have at, what is it? The ARC early career. Oh God, Amanda, help me out. What do they call them? Dan, the ARC grants for postdocs. DECRAs. Sorry, DECRAs. They're 15 times harder than an ARC discovery. Right. So you've got to take any door that opens, any door, and apply for everything. Apply for things in every door that you can imagine. Yeah. I mean, if you can get a postdoc, I wish I'd had a postdoc. That would have been the greatest blessing of my life. But, I never had that opportunity. And then I've seen people who get a postdoc and they're desperate to get the job at the same place. So they do all this teaching and stuff and they don't produce research, which was the postdoc was all about. And then, they move on or they don't get the job rather. So yeah, postdocs are great if you can get them, but they are very, very difficult to get. It would be easier for you to team up with a couple of other researchers and get a linkage or an ARC discovery, for example, get involved that way than through a normal competitive process for a postdoc.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
what do you think are the most important skills to develop during the PhD outside of the research skills for employability?
Dan, what do you think? Dan's just finished. Come on, you tell us. You're just the end of this thing. What do you think are the most important skills to get a job?
I don't feel qualified to answer, to be honest with you.
Well, you are qualified.
I defer back to you, Gary, I think.
But you know, what have you done, Dan? You've connected with some of the best researchers in the world, right? You've got some publications out there. You've done a stunning dissertation, and you've also done a lot of teaching across different areas. So that's a pretty good template and foundation to then use as a springboard to get a job. And so, yeah, you want to have covered a lot of bases, but you don't want to be so broad that you're a jack of all trades. Right? People will, all the jobs that I've got, and I've got about 9 jobs in my career, every time they've had a hole in their curriculum that they wanted me to fill. It wasn't that I could teach everything. It was because he's the expert in that area, we need him. So there's a little bit of that. So, you know, when I went in for the Melbourne job, I knew exactly what they needed. I'd done my homework in terms of, you know, each of the areas like ethnomusicology and musicology and, you know, performance. I knew exactly where they'd come from and what they, you know, their philosophy was. I'd done my homework. So you know the institution. And if you know the institution, then they're better positioned to know you and how you might fit in. And I've done that for all my jobs. You know, when I went over to Illinois, for example, I'd been there for a semester, you know, 10 years ago previously, and I'd done my homework. I was sort of sending little emails to everyone asking, you know, what was going on, what the politics are, et cetera, et cetera.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, I think I might finish the session there. Does anyone else have a burning question? No. Okay.
Only can we get the slides? Is that okay?
Oh, they're pretty awful. There's terrible
No,
slides.
they're great. The self-determination theory slides are really cool.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, look, I'll send them to Xanthi and she can send them out. I'm very happy to sort of give you the slides.
Thanks, Gary.
But look, can I just make one final wrap-up thing? I'm a dinosaur. I'm the old school, right? And I'm hard-nosed. As you get older, you become a little bit more frustrating and dog-minded about things. When I started, you know, the discipline was just emerging. It was just starting. Can't say that about it now. I mean, it's just, you know, what we've been able to do in Australia is just phenomenal. And you are the next generation. You're going to take it somewhere else. And I know you will, like my generation sort of took it somewhere else. And so I wish you all the very best. I wish there was a silver bullet I could fire and you could all get a job or a postdoc or, you know, great examiner reports like Dan. But, you know, there will be some setbacks. There's going to be lots of setbacks, and be resilient. And just, if this is what you want, just be buoyant. Just keep going. Don't let the turkeys get you down, ever. It'll happen. You'll find your place.
Thank you so much again, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
Pleasure. Take care, guys.
Thank you. Giving Gary a round of applause. And thanks everyone for coming.